everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Mixtape Podcast. Today, my guest is Muhammad Ali Samejo, and he is the author of Legends of Karachi. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
So let's start with a very typical question that authors usually get. You have mentioned it in your, author's bio of why you became a writer, but I would like you to share with our audience as to, your influence. And for our audience, later during our discussion, they will understand why this question, in this specific case, is a bit more interesting.
So I'd like to say that I became an author completely by accident. Well, it was just a coincidence, actually. A friend of mine and I were talking about the state of television in Pakistan and the way it is these days. And we were all, concerned that it is not truly reflective of Pakistani society as a whole. And then it's all very repetitive and there could be potential for different stories. And I just happened to mention that, I've got all these ideas in my head. And then one of my friends, a colleague actually, she said that, why don't you pitch them to television studios? And I'm like, I don't think I'd make it past that stage. And then she suggested something which was odd at the time. She said, why don't you write a book? And now I had been a reader before that. I had been involved in the media industry before that. My father was a television producer with Pakistan Television for 30 years. But up until that point, it had never occurred to me to write a book. I was like, can I actually do that? Is that something that's doable? And then, it started developing in my head. And then the more I researched it, the more I found out, there are people who are writing short stories and blogs and are even getting published. And so one thing led to another. By chance, I got a sponsored post at Facebook for a writers group. I joined that. And from there, it just sort of took off. I started publishing my stories over there. I was a little nervous. I was wondering, what kind of response would I get? And it was actually an amazing response. And that just sort of motivated me to keep writing. And the more I wrote, the better I got at it. And of course, I received a ton of feedback. It told me, what could be better, what could be different as well. So I worked on that. I tried incorporating that into my stories. And this was 2017 or 18. I'm not sure exactly the year. And it just has not stopped since then. It's just, gone all the way up.
Yeah. So your first book, as you mentioned, was a collection of short stories, and the Legends of Karachi is your first novel. So before we get into the book, how was the writing experience? You've already touched upon it, that you started writing and you were getting feedback from it. But when you went to the compilation phase of that short story, how was that entire process? Did you had to fine tune it? Basically, I want you to share your experience as a first time author.
So I had tried, there were two avenues that I could use to get published. I could get published through the international publishers, Penguin and Simon and Schuster, very hopeful. But I actually looked into it. I found out how the process was to query people, to query agents. It's not that straightforward. You actually have to look for agents in the US and the UK. And they in turn will take your book to a publisher, and they in turn will get you those really big lucrative publishing deals. And this was around the time when I had finished writing my books, both of them actually. This was around the time that the lockdown happened during COVID. And of course, I had a lot of time in my hands, so I figured, I should just start compiling the books. And again, the internet helped. There are entire forums upon forums where you can find out what to do with your book. There are formatting guidelines. There's APA, MLA, and all the other guidelines available. And based on that, I started formatting my book. I started cleaning it. I started fine-tuning it. I also came across other tools such as Grammarly. I also came across Google Docs, and they helped a lot in editing the book itself. One of the other things that I found very challenging in Pakistan particularly was that editors were very there were not a lot of good quality editors available. And I sort of pride myself on being as detailed as I can be and as sharp as I can be. So I took it upon myself to edit my books myself. I'm not sure exactly how well that must have worked, but it has worked quite well to a certain degree. And then, of course, I started fine-tuning it, and then I started following the best practices. So when I realized that the international publishing scene was not happening, I decided to embark on it by myself. And that's when I came across self-publishing for my first book, Damaged, the collection of short stories. And I started from that. I got a pretty nice response. I kept marketing it, and then it just sort of went from there. Around that time, when my first book came out, Liberty Publishing got interested in my work. And so I had Legends of Karachi already completed, and I presented that to them. I had always wanted Legends of Karachi to be published by a much bigger entity, and I'm glad that that happened. So it sort of just worked out for me, I guess.
So obviously, as you mentioned that, you had both the books ready almost at the same time, and you were sort of compiling them around at the same time. However, what was the difference between the writing process when it comes to writing a short story and a full-length novel, and specifically something like Legends of Karachi, which has a lot of characters and storylines being in an interweb sort of a situation?
So with okay, so full disclosure, I should probably mention that I started Legends of Karachi first. It was actually my first project, and it sort of spun off from that. One or two stories sort of spun off from that, and I figured, they didn't have a place in Legends of Karachi, but they were such good stories. I thought, let's try an experiment. With the other collection, Damaged, which is the short stories, I set a couple of goals for myself. The stories had to be short stories, and the stories had to involve 2 characters per story. And the way it would work is it would work as a conversation between 2 people. That's it. No other characters would be present. I mean, they would be talked about, yes, but that's it. No other characters would be present in the story. So it was not that challenging because they were just individual short stories. The challenge was to incorporate the issues that they touched on. I happen to like to write on the issues that are taking place in Pakistan, particularly in society, particularly topics such as harassment, bullying, internet fame, social media fame, stuff like that. So it wasn't that hard to actually compile Damage that way. With Legends of Karachi, though, I had to build proper character profiles because, as you said, that there are multiple characters in them. So just to take one character, there is a character of Amreen Sani, who's the journalist. I had to chart out her entire journey beforehand. Of course, it improved as I went along. And then, of course, I had to create interactions between her and the other characters. So I had to jot down her plotline first. Then I picked another character whose plotline would coincide or just go off on another tangent. So that way I had my characters in set. Then I just needed to get the events in order and then build from there. So building a novel is actually a lot more complicated because you need to be aware of what's taken place before. Like if you're going to do something in chapter number 20, you have to make sure it doesn't contradict with chapter number 11. So that I had to sort of like plot out beforehand. So I made a rough outline, I jotted it all down, and then I took the characters along through those plot lines.
Speaking of Legends of Karachi, the book starts off, obviously you have already shared with our audience that, it's, you like talking about, subjects that are very relevant to our, daily life. And the book starts off, I am not going to give out a lot of plot lines so that, the readers nothing is spoiled for them. But it starts off as a story that we expect a Karachi urban story to start with. And, we, to an extent in the initial phase of the book, you feel like, this is going, you see where the plot is going, and you think that, we, unlike the real life, we might find heroes, or we might find, the protagonists in the daily life people, and for a change, the common man wins. But then suddenly something happens, and the entire genre of the book apparently changes. It is no longer just a simple fiction, urban fiction. There's a sci-fi element to it, and it starts feeling like you're actually reading a script of a Hollywood film. So, and I will combine this with my next question because you've already answered part of it. Is that, did you develop characters first, or did you develop the plot line first? At what point did you decide that this is the sort of combination that you want to bring in? Because usually mainstream Desi English writing is very straightforward, sticks to more traditional storylines. Very few people are sort of diverging into sci-fi. And but you this is not, I won't call this a hardcore sci-fi, because it was a mix. So how did all of that happen?
I'll take the Hollywood thing as a compliment. As for, you actually made a very good point. I did start fleshing the characters out first. Because up until that point, remember, I had no business being an author. I didn't even know the first thing about being an author. But I did know the kind of people that I wanted to talk about. I wanted to talk about people like Ambreen or Nadir or GM or Sabah, the characters in the book. So I had them in mind. I had their circumstances in mind. And of course, I involved some sci-fi elements as well as some metaphysical elements. You'll notice all of that happening. But what I attempted to do at this point was to sort of ground it, not make it completely, unrealistic. I mean, obviously, you could have a fiction with aliens from other worlds, or black magic and stuff like that. I wanted to keep it, relevant to how society is, as well as how far technology has progressed. For example, there is an entire plot line about, surveillance, for example, without giving too much of the plot away. And you can see that happening even now. It's happening right now. You may not know it, but surveillance is happening on a much bigger scale. If you have ever ventured into what Edward Snowden has leaked out and stuff like that. So that was just one aspect. And I think, okay, fine, let's just, stretch it just a little bit more. There are other elements which I figured, okay, fine, yeah, this would actually be pushing the realms of reality. But I decided very long ago when I was writing Legends of Karachi that this would not be a conventional story. This would be brimming with what ifs. Like the actions that Sabah takes. They're, normally if you see those kind of circumstances, you're like, you know what, none of my business, I'm not getting into it. But what if, and then you have the whole story there. And then of course, you come up with a sci-fi story of K Electric doing power breakdowns everywhere. But what if, and it's just, pushing that realm of imagination up ahead a little bit. So that is what I wanted to do. I didn't want to, fool people into thinking that this would be a conventional story. It wasn't. I wanted people to understand that these are the kind of stories that happen to us on a daily basis. At the same time, every now and then, if I were to pass by a stranger on the street doing something outlandish, and I'd be like, you know what? I wonder what kind of life that person has. What if he's actually more than meets the eye? And that's how it just took off from there. So a bit of sci-fi, a bit of supernatural, a bit of metaphysical stuff in there, but again, kept grounded. That was what I wanted to do. Nothing too outlandish.
And that is, I think, something that I really like, because we who have our pop culture for our generation has been, when you were sort of fed up with the local stuff, it was Hollywood. And one of the things, while we like watching it, there's a thing that always says, every time there's this apocalyptic or attack on the humanity, it always happens in New York City, apparently. Okay. So I like the fact that Karachi is culturally, and on the sort of lifestyle it has, is always compared to the one of the world's biggest metropolitan cities. And it was very, you could actually relate to it. And the fact that there were those sci-fi and those sort of elements, it was actually fun reading. So speaking of those sort of elements, you used Roman characters. Now, again, we won't be giving a lot of details, but you there is an aspect where you have like shared these very specific characters you have given uh, in the book, regular people on the front, but they have this, sort of alter ego, sort of a personality traits. What were, and the names are very specific. They have symbols. They have very specific relevance. Where did that idea came in?
Okay, yeah, you're referring to, without spoiling too much, but yes, there were Roman analogs. There were people who were given Roman code names. I I suppose it because again, as per my introduction, I've been bred on Hollywood and Western entertainment, and I've watched it all my life. Growing up in the '80s and the '90s and the 2000s, that is all your force fed on. And yes, every single movie will tell you that every single alien invasion happens in the US. I got fed up with that. I wanted them to come to Karachi. There's another book by Mr. Omar Iftikhar. He actually wrote a sci-fi on in aliens coming to Karachi. But as far as the Roman characters were concerned, I had this idea of incorporating a kind of secret society almost. And, they would be unique, they would be special, they would have code names and their own code. So I was kind of looking for something that would be completely different. And then all of a sudden I realized what their individual aspects were, and then I sort of came up with the idea of naming them after the Roman deities. So for instance, you have a guy like Mercury who is very hot-headed. He likes jumping into problems. You have a guy like Mars, who, as we all know, is the deity of war. So I incorporated that into a person who specializes in combat situations. And then you have a guy like Pluto, who is the harbinger of death. So that name worked out. And it just started turning very clever. And then I did a little bit more research. I found those symbols that are strewn across the book. And I figured it would be a very interesting thing to do. It would be a very novel thing to do. And so that's how it came about. It was just one of those things that happened, really. It wasn't one of my plans, but it sort of developed into one. And that's one of the wonders of writing. You start off with something, and as you keep on chiseling it away, you discover more and more layers, and those layers fascinate you. And you're like, what if they fascinate other people? And there they are.
And your characters did fascinate a lot. And I think another plus that went for this book was the fact that despite you had these Hollywoodish elements to the characters, the plot line, the stories, the issues were very much grounded. And there wasn't any aspect where it was like, oh, this new tech solution is here to fix this age old social problem, or our K electrics issue can be resolved just with a flick of a wand. But that didn't happen.
Well, wouldn't that be nice though? Wouldn't that be nice?
Oh, that would be awesome. But unfortunately, I think not doing that also, I think gave character to the plot, to the story. All the, I think when it comes to jotting down as a book reviewer, for example, if I'm jotting down the positives of this book, something that's on top of the thing would be that from the start to the end, what fascinated me was that there were characters, and it felt like they were, short stories in themselves. But in the end, everything was basically every character, big or small, sort of connected into the bigger plot. However, there was just one character that I felt did not gel in as well as all the other pieces of the puzzle did. Which was, and not that the individual story, if you read that section, it was interesting in itself to use that concept of metaphysical elements in it, but it didn't, I felt it didn't well into the bigger storyline as well as everything else did. That was that of the professor who was at the grid, trying to go back in time. So just care to elaborate on that?
So it was okay. Yeah, the professor story did not actually, work well. I mean, yeah, it was just sort of like a plot device that, okay, fine, you had a big power breakdown, all right, all over the city. And so it was just one of those what if scenarios about, what if this would happen. But you're right, it didn't merge exactly with the rest of the plot line. It was just sort of like as a side flavor. And even right until the end, I was kind of conflicted about whether or not to keep it. Because as I mentioned that, this story, if you notice, it was also like a conversation. And it was kind of from where the idea of my short story collection sort of spun off. Yeah, wouldn't it be nice to sort of, have it there? But then I realized, why not just leave it in there? Why not, let the reader make their own assumptions about what to do with it? Whether they want it to fit into the narrative is up to them. And even if they don't want it to fit with the narrative, it's perfectly fine. It's a story that can be enjoyed by itself. The reason I sort of like left it in there was mostly because of the power breakdown thing. Plus, I think I wrote that story at a very critical point in my own life. So I figured, that story sort of needed to be there. And some people have actually enjoyed it a lot in Legends of Karachi.
Yeah.
A couple of other people have actually sort of been vocal about, why the story is even there. But it's there. And it's just like one of those side elements, like another story with Saklan, the rickshaw driver. It's also there.
Yeah.
It sort of connects, but, I was actually hoping on leaving more sequel possibilities for later. So maybe it's there for that reason. Maybe I'll sort of, look into that at that point. Not sure about the professor, though. I think the professor story is just there. But it also acts like one of those stories that, you hear in the sense of what Karachi can be like. There's this guy who, whatever. So there you are.
Yeah, while it doesn't fit in the, as I said, at the end, all the puzzle pieces fit in. It doesn't like really gets in there, but it wasn't that much out of the line. But because once that that element of the book, where there's like, well, as you say, anything can happen in Karachi, is like, sure, why not?
Yeah, that's right.
It's
exactly that. Exactly that.
And
yeah, it could. Why not? Right? You never know. Again, you never know what people are like. Your next door neighbor could be, plotting something. Who knows? And so it was just one of those things. How far can I push the realm of imagination? And that's where it sort of went with that.
So given that you had to like, as you shared earlier, that you had to like take on storyboarding characters very seriously in this book, and obviously they got polished as the storyline went, but you had to come up with these. So which one was your favorite character?
Okay, that's kind of tough. As an author, you sort of become very critical about your characters.
Which character you?
Yeah, that's kind of like asking a parent, which kid is favorite. And I'm a parent, so I've got two girls, and I'd rather not pick favorites. But if I had to be really invested with one particular character, I was very invested with the character of Dr. Sabah Sheikh.
Yeah.
I was invested in her character because she had a very black and white idea or perception of the world, because she hadn't lived in Pakistan. She grew up somewhere else, and then she saw the world from a completely different lens. And then when she came back to Pakistan, she could not, well, she could relate to it because obviously there are conditions of domestic violence happening in the US as well. And then when she came to Pakistan, she could not sort of like accept how it was presented to her. And being a medical professional, the choices that she made to sort of like take on this threat of domestic violence, that is what really struck me, because as doctors are very, I like to believe that doctors are very moral people. They act according to a moral code. And the fact that Sabah does not see that code as a very hard-written rule and decides to, do what she can, that is what really struck with me for Sabah as a character. I wanted to examine that particularly. So that's why, that was one of the characters that really, struck with me.
My next question would be about more focused on the ending of the book.
Yeah, okay.
So usually when we sort of read something of this genre or mix of genre, usually the idea, even if it's done this form of storytelling is done, be it in the book form or in a comic or in a, in a film or TV thing, at the end they feel like, there's going to be a closure, there's going to be a sort of a happy ending version of it where, the problem has been fixed. You didn't go that route. You opted for a very open-ended, as you use the word for that scientist story, that you left it there for readers to see
Yeah.
how they want to perceive it. The ending also, I felt, was something like, you kept it open-ended. Yes, there was a time where things apparently, for some Nader's character, for example, for him, he ended up developing
Yeah.
something that he had in his mind, but it didn't end. The reality after the utopia went, it didn't really resolve an issue. Maybe also leaving the point that, there is no golden rule, or there's no, magic wand for the issues that humanity faces. You have to go with the flow, and you have to deal with the small portions of it as they come. So, want to elaborate a bit on your take of when you were deciding on leaving an open ending and not a rosy picture of, all the powers combined, Captain Planet is here to solve the things, wasn't there. So just share how you decided that that's how you want to leave the book.
Yeah. Okay. As growing up, I've seen so many happy endings happen. They all lived happily ever after. Everything was so fine. Every single Bollywood movie ends at a happy ending. Hero saves the heroine and destroys the villain, and. But you have to ask yourself, when the end appears, is that the end? Like, is there more to the story? Does life just stop going on for those characters? All right. And one of the lessons that I learned the hard way, sort of, is that life actually does not end. Life just keeps going on. And just because you stop seeing that life go on, it doesn't mean that, it stopped. This is one of the things that I examined in another short story that I wrote for Damaged. That was based on a popular television serial in Pakistan called Anak Wala Jinn. And I wrote it from the point of view of the villain, because we all saw that the villain disappeared and was vanquished. But then I wrote it from his point of view. What happened exactly after he was vanquished? Right? Did he just stop living? Was there a happily ever after? Because things rarely ever end. Things turn around. All right, things go from good to bad to worse. Like, even if you look at political situations, we're thinking, what, things are going good, the bad guys are gone, and then all of a sudden things turn around. So who knows? So I wanted to leave it open-ended and open to interpretation, to let the readers decide for themselves. What would they like? Would they like to have closure? Because it's actually not really, possible in the realm of continuance. Would they like to see more? And I kind of left it open-ended because maybe I was going to write a sequel, Legends of Karachi 2, okay? But more than that, I wanted to let people know that, there are no ends, only loose ends. And now you've got loose ends everywhere with the epilogue that I wrote. I wrote it that way so that people would be able to cultivate their own endings, be able to figure out, what might have happened, and even look forward to a continuance of sorts. So that is why I left it open-ended. That was one of the reasons. And plus, again, I didn't see their journeys ending. I just saw their journeys beginning. So that was what my plan was.
That's a very interesting way to put it, and I think you've summed it up very well. Before I put out my actual question, which is obviously going to be asking you what you're up to nowadays, as you've mentioned, you have plans for maybe a prequel or sequels. But just before, because you have sort of had that experience with your father of having access to TV production, have you ever thought of actually pitching this to our local production houses somehow? Because I think their typical stories are done and dusted with, and everybody says, where are different stories? And my take on that is, you and a lot of other local authors that are writing very interesting things, and I was like, all they have to do is pick a book and opt for an adaptation for it. Hollywood does it, Netflix does it, so why not our production houses? So have you ever thought of trying your luck on that side as well?
Well, since it's only been like a couple of years that I've actually got something tangible and produced and everything. I'm sure given time, I would love to, submit it up ahead. Also with regards to how my time with my father was spent, and, it was a long time ago. It seems like a completely different lifetime ago. I did, assist him with productions and stuff. So I might have a few bridges left that I might actually get in touch with. On the other hand, I would just love to sort of like, hi, I'm a writer, just, have a look at my book. At the same time, I would like to see a certain kind of, maturity among television producers, the artists, the production companies, to welcome stories like this. Not just mine, there are stories out there that are, pushing the boundaries. And I think a lot of it has to do with their take on what the audience wants. But I would like to see the audience welcome something like Legends of Karachi, or something like Divided Species, or something like Love Not. I'm very hopeful about that. Let's see how that goes. It's just one of those things that I have to sort of like exercise a wait and see approach.
So you are writing on anything else? Are you working on any another book, short story, and when can people expect to see it?
Yes, I am sort of like finishing my next book. It's not a collection of short stories. It's more like a series. It's basically a crime investigation series based in Pakistan. So it has elements of, some elements of detective shows from abroad. And the idea is that there is a special police task force that is investigating crimes of a sexual nature in Pakistan, particularly different kinds of, harassment issues, or sexual harassment issues, or gender-based violence. So there's an investigative team of the police that is looking into it. It's kind of a revolutionary idea, not just for the police itself, but like for people in Pakistan. But they are investigating these crimes with an open mind and with certain expertise. They have the central character of this book is their consultant, who is sort of like a reformed criminal himself, and they're using his expertise to sort of get to these crimes. So that I'm actually sort of like, I'd like to say I'm 87% done with it. Once it's complete, I'm gonna just, shop around for publishers and see how that goes.
Good luck with that, and the idea sounds really interesting. Before we go, do you want to plug in any social media accounts where if anybody wants to reach out to you, how can they get in touch?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm on Instagram all the time. And I don't know if I can just like type it in. It's Ali Samejo. I'm right there. I've been there for like ever since I started, plugging Damaged. I've been on Facebook for a while, but I'm sort of like taking a break from Facebook these days. But yes, I'm on Instagram all the time, and it's Masamejo. Just come over there, check out some of my stuff from my book. I keep up posting stuff from my book over there all the time. I do some creative graphics over there as well. So I'm easily accessible on Instagram. People can catch me up there.
We'll also plug it in our text when you post this podcast on our different platforms. Thank you so much for your time. This was a really interesting and fun conversation. Best of luck for your future books, and we would like to have you back again and discuss them as well.
I would love to. This has been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm also glad that you enjoyed the book too. And, thank you so much again. God bless. Take care.
Thank you.
See you around.